Alright, as this shows, we will be doing the craps game, and I have saved this as craps game 1, so I'll put the 1 in here so that we will be able to compile it and see what happens. Alright, first of all, notice that they have started out with a private int point equals 0. Alright, this is an instance variable, and it is going to be used to determine whether or not this is a first roll. Notice or remember from looking at the rules of the game, if you have not won or lost on the first roll, the number that you rolled, your total number of points, becomes something called point that you try to get for the next set of rolls. And so we need to have that. And if roll is 0, which is impossible for a set of dice, then we know that this is going to be a first roll. So let's first of all make a Word document. So that's for the first roll. And let's underline and bold. All right. So we're going to have some sort of decision on, did you roll a 7 or 11? Did you roll a 2, a 3, or a 12? And then we're going to come down and say, on a second or more roll. That makes sense. So again, let's bold and underline that. So if on a second roll, point wins, what do I want? 7 loses. All right, so on a second roll, or if you're second, third, fourth, whatever, if you get your point, you win. If you roll a 7, you'll lose. And if you roll anything else, you just roll again. So now we have to code that in. So this looks like there are 2 big conditions. So we want to start, and let's just for fun take this out. So the first thing you're going to do is say if let's do this. So we're going to put all right, so now we've got the basics set up. They've set point to 0, and result they're saying is going to be 1 if the player wins, -1 if you lose, and 0 if the player continues rolling. So at this point, they're just telling us we've got this, and we establish it at this point so that we can use it inside our if clauses. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is say if now, I have a tendency toward paranoia, and so I'm going to put my conditions inside parentheses. And that is not necessarily at all, but that's just the way I have a tendency to do it. Okay, if the person wins, then what we need to do is set result equals 1. Now, point is 0, so I don't have to reset point at this time. So that I'll just leave that alone. And now I'm going to say else if total equals 2 equal 3, or 12. I need that guy. There we go. Now I'm going to say all right, so at this point we've won, so we have result equal to 1. Here we lose, result equals -1. And we have else point equals total and SULT equals 0. Okay, so this sets point to something other than 0, and it sets result to 0. Now, way down here, after we get through, we return result, and then there's something here that's all called get point. Well, since both result lives inside this method, and it's also what I'm returning, my int return, and here point gets returned outside of that method, but as I now give you whipsaw, since this is an instance variable, it is accessible everywhere. It starts at 0, and if we're down here, in other words, we neither won nor lost on the first roll, then point is going to be the total of the die, and it can be returned from get point. All right, so let's see if this compiles at this point. And now it's saying might not have been initialized. That's because we haven't gone through this second. We haven't gone through this else, and so it's not had a chance to initialize. So let's do the else portion of this. We're going to have exactly the same set, a win, a lose, and a try again. So if let's get both of these in here. All right, now I'm going to have to result equals 1, and I have to now reset point to 0 so that we can start a new game. Else if and we're going to do basically the same thing. We'll steal this, but this now becomes -1. -1 means you lose, and so whether you win or lose, we're going to start over again. And now we're just going to say else result equals 0. Okay, so you have Let's compile, and it compiles. All right. So what we know is at the very top coming in, we have the name of our class. We have set our instance variable point to 0. Since 0 is not a possibility on a pair of dice, it's a nice thing to use. And now we come in. Total gets passed in from somewhere. We have no idea where at this point, and we don't care. All we care about is we're going to get something called total, which is the total of the dots on 2 dice. We're going to declare result, which we're going to use to say, was it a win or a loss, or we get to keep playing. We're now going to check if point equals 0. In other words, is this a first game or first roll? Then the first thing we do is we check to see, did you roll a 7 or an 11? And if you did, the result is a 1. We don't have to reset point because point is 0. Now, if point is 2, 3, or 12, you lose, you get a -1. And again, you don't have to set point to 0 because it already is. Our third option is that you didn't roll any of these 5 numbers, and what you did roll becomes point, and result is 0. Since on the next roll, when total gets sent in and it checks point, point will not be 0, and so we won't do this. We'll do the else, and we will check to see if the total that came in is equal or has the same value as point. If it does, you're a winner. Result is 1, and we reset point to 0. Else if your total was 7, you lose, the result is -1, and point gets set to 0. The third option is you did not roll point or a 7, so result is 0, it's a non-entity, and you start over again. And here we return the result, whichever way it went, minus -1, 0, or 1, and then we can check for the saved point. And that's it. That's all we had to do, at least for the craps game. The other thing we had to do was write a die program. Okay, so if you look at the book and the handout that I gave you, it had that you had a public static void main, you had a method call, you initialized a new die called die, strangely enough, and it looks like we've got a method called roll and a method called get num dots. Okay, so how are we going to do that? What we need to do is have a public void roll method. Now, how do I know that it is going to be void? Well, if we look at this, there is nothing on the left side to return the value to. So it just sits there. So this just does something. And the something that it's going to do is it's going to get, or it's going to create a random number between 1 and 6 that will be the number of dots on the dice. But then we're going to have a way to pass that back. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say private int num dots. So I want to say that num dots is going to equal, all right, make that a comment. All right, so now to remember how to do that, we're going to say num dots equals if I do that, math.random can be 0. So that's going to be a number that's now going to be between 0 and 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 1 to that. So that if random is 0, 0 times 6 is 0 plus 1 gives me 1. 6 times 9.9 whatever will still be 5.9 something. And so that will truncate when I turn it to an int to 5. So 5 plus 1 is 6, but that means that I need to cast this to an integer, or to an int, excuse me. I need to cast this to an int, and I'm going to call it num dots. Now I'm going to have public int get num dots. Get num dots. Okay, so get num dots simply returns num dots. And since it's effectively an instance variable here, it isn't effectively, it is an instance variable, then everything should work, because I need it outside the main. And look at that. We get to celebrate. And now if I run this, I have two numbers each time. All right. So I now feel successful here. All right, when you get through with typing this up, other than adding the appropriate header, you also need to add comments in this to explain what each part of this is doing. And I will expect that at this point you'll know how to generate random numbers in any range needed. Okay, so we've got that. Alrighty, that should do it for the moment. Command Shift